Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Hormonally Speaking. I am really pumped this week to chat with my guest because, as I was just telling her, I have been going on my own ADHD journey, trying to figure some things out recently. And we're going to be talking all about ADHD and hormones today and how it's all interconnected. And I know that there's a lot of women out there that just found out that they had ADHD during COVID, or maybe learned that they might have it. And so it's like, it's a big thing right now, right? So we're going to talk about all of that. And you're going to learn so much. And I'm excited to learn alongside you with my guest today, Adele Wimsett, who is a women's health practitioner and cyclical living expert. Having co authored the book Essential Feminine Wisdom, she is passionate about educating women and girls on how to harness the power of their cyclical nature. From menarche to menopause, Adele bridges the woo and the science, supporting women to balance their hormones naturally. I love that. Adele's niche within the women's health arena is specializing in supporting ADHD women to understand how their hormones affect their traits. Welcome, Adele.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Yes, super excited to talk about this, as I was saying to you before, and just brought up with the audience. Let's start really simple and talk about what ADHD is for those that
Mm.
aren't quite aware of all of it that it encompasses.
So ADHD is a really poorly named umbrella term for three different subtypes, first of all. So it stands for attention deficit hyperactive disorder, but many of us don't identify with the hyperactive bit externally as it's kind of been seen. And we don't have a problem with attention when we're really interested in something. So it's a really poor name anyway, which there's a lot of debate about. But underneath it at the moment, there are three subtypes. Now, those subtypes are inattentive ADHD, which I think in the States is called ADD still.
Hmm.
Then we have at the other end of the scale, we have hyperactive. And then in the middle, we have combined type, which for us lucky ones, we get all of it together. So it's these three umbrella terms, and it can manifest differently in every person that you meet. And also in women, it can present quite differently, which is why we've got the short straw
Yeah.
with understanding down to that beautiful thing, the gender bias that exists in the research around it, which I'm
Mm.
sure we could deep dive into. But in a nutshell,
Forever.
that's what it is in terms of terminology.
So, what is this kind of resurgence? It's not a resurgence. It's just, I think about when I was growing up as a kid, all these people, but really boys, were getting
Yeah.
diagnosed with, ADD at the time, and now it's ADHD. And yet we're sort of seeing this coming out in a different way, and women really identifying with it now in a way that I don't think happened before,
Mm.
and that girls, didn't get diagnosed with that, maybe didn't identify with it. What do what is that all about?
I think it's quite complex. I think it's very easy to kind of go, oh, it's social media, or it's this. It's not. I think there's a variety of factors. One of them being we have much more accessible information, giving us a broad range of what ADHD looks like in real life for women to go,
Mm,
oh my God, that's me,
mhm,
and being able
mhm.
to then, we love to know why. So we find ourselves down rabbit holes
Yeah.
for days, going, oh my God, this is me. And then still go, is this me? I'm not sure if I'm a fraud here. Right. So this
Right.
journey. I also think we are living at a time where I don't believe women have been quite as stressed chronically for so long, and our nervous systems are absolutely wired.
Yeah.
So perhaps before, when life wasn't quite consistently as stressful as it was, we were much better able to mask to fit the gender stereotypes of what we're meant to do as a woman and a little girl. So we hid it a lot
Mhm,
better because there
mhm,
weren't so many competing demands on our nervous system. So I
mhm.
think that's one of the reasons as well. Also, the fact that women are kind of going, wait a minute, I'm missing from this kind of whole young, naughty little white boy explanation of what
Mhm,
ADHD meant. We are not
mhm,
the naughty
mhm.
child generally
Right.
bouncing off the classroom walls. It's so much deeper and complex than that. So I think there's a variety of things that are influencing this oh my gosh, this is me, because I run a community to support ADHD women. And even recently, there was a woman who went to her local doctor and he told her explicitly, you cannot have ADHD because you're a woman. I mean, like, when were you last trained in like 1982? What are you talking about? So, but this
Too
is
many of them
still
out there.
there.
Yeah.
So these complexities that are there because it presents so differently.
Right.
We learn from the minute we are born how to be a good girl.
Yeah.
You know, and we can recognize, like, I'm not quite like that. We jump in and finish people's sentences. We get really excited. We, you know, these kind of things. And we go, oh, we're not meant to be doing that on some level. So we learn to mask.
Yes.
And then we kind of hide these bits of our personality, which takes so much energy. And we're doing it subconsciously. It's not a manipulative thing.
Right.
We're learning to survive. And
Right.
so it gets lost. And quite often when we have this hormonal shift at adolescence, the lid comes off. And it can show some of our behavior. And then we have this, as we know, this second puberty almost at perimenopause, which is where we all go, okay, the lid is officially off. I am not hiding this anymore. Here I am. Why am I not coping like everyone else is? And this is where we're seeing a massive rise in diagnosis.
Makes total sense. And I've been calling it functional ADHD, right? I think so many women it's kind of like, I mean, it's not the same at all as a functional alcoholic, but the ability to sort of like function in the world to where people don't notice these things because we've adapted so well. But like you said, start to hit perimenopause and things just go a little haywire, right? We can't have the same control.
And we often get misdiagnosed. You know, women I see all the time have spent years on antidepressants, anti-anxiety medication. It's not quite hit the mark, but it's like, we don't really know what else to do with you, so take this.
Yes.
And I think, you know, I cannot tell you the number of times, and I'm sure you've experienced this, I don't know what conversations you've had, but where people have said to me, you can't have ADHD, you're far too well put together. And I'm like, thank you very much for your psychological assessment. That's really helpful. But actually, you don't see what's going on inside. And when we're talking about this hyperness, yes, we can be physically hyper. I mean, I'm never sitting still, but internally, the hyperness. I mean, I speak very quickly, as you can tell, so we can have hyper speech, hyper thought. And I love this explanation of there being like 100 TV screens on, all talking in a different language with a theme tune playing in the background. And that's just how we function on a day-to-day basis. So and we're just showing up like, hi, you know, this is fine. And it's like,
everything's
wow.
great.
Yeah, you're not hearing what's going on inside.
It's funny that you mentioned the talking part, because it's actually what somebody said to me recently, how they could tell that I was ADHD because they are, and it's a woman, and you know, she's tuned into, I don't know that I talk that fast, but sort of the jumping around, right? Like when I started telling a story, I'm like, oh, but I got to back up and tell you this part of the story, and then I got to back up. And so
and this is, you know, when we think about why this gets missed in girls, like we can start to feel like not social anxiety, maybe for some women, but we kind of avoid social situations because when we were learning to socialize in groups, people would be talking about something. We're thinking about it, the conversation moves on, and then 20 minutes later we start talking about that thing that we were talking about. Like, what? We were talking about that, we've moved on from that. I'm like, well, I'm still talking about that, I'm still thinking about it.
You're like, I'm processing. So, okay.
I'm like, what was that about? So and then we learn to just keep quiet so that we don't look stupid.
Right. Well, so I definitely want to dive way deep into the connection between ADHD and hormones, but tell us your story first. Like, how did you figure out you had it? You know, what was your process like?
I will summarize it briefly, but my background was actually in safeguarding, where I specialized in female offending. So I used to manage a multi-agency team. And at the time, it came to my attention for one of the team members that I might have ADHD. But of course, I was managing offenders, and everything we knew about that at the time really was about boys. And I was like, I used to joke and go, oh, I've got ADHD. You know, I used to quite flippantly. And I was like, well, I've always been successful, I say in inverted commas. So I'm like, well, you know, I really, I don't know, it's not going to be a big thing in my life, whatever. And then several years ago, COVID, you know, and I was like, why is everyone like managing this homeschooling, this working, like this being contained in with people all the time? Like everyone's finding it tough, but I'm like, I feel like I've got a bit more of an edge on this. And then I started seeing some patterns in my daughter where someone said, if you considered ADHD. So as a good parent I am, I trotted along to this ADHD support group to hear a psych talk, and he was amazing. And within 2 minutes, he's like, never considered getting a diagnosis. And 4 weeks later, I was fully diagnosed with severe combined type, actually. And
Oh,
I had like, so I still went in, even though I'd done hours and hours and hours of research, and I knew a lot about special educational needs from my background. I still went in going, I could be such a fraud sat here now. What if he says I haven't got it? What's actually wrong with me? And how I know all these things. And then he sort of circled in big writing ADHD, and I had never felt so validated in my life. I burst out crying, which I didn't expect. He's like, do you do this? Do you do this? Do you do this? I was like, uh-huh. Yeah. I was like, doesn't everybody?
All
He's
of
like,
it.
no. I was like, oh. And I think the saddest thing of the diagnosis for me, I didn't have a huge sadness. I was like, yes, I know what it is, and I know how to harness its power now and be understanding and kind and compassionate to myself about the other bits instead of fighting myself. But I think the sadness was, I realized how much energy I've spent my whole life overcompensating for my traits, because women with ADHD get judged for having character flaws that are their traits. And if we have something called rejection sensitivity disorder, which is RSD alongside it, which is very common in ADHD women, particularly noticeable in little girls, we disguise this kind of getting something wrong or not being liked, this people pleasing. And I remember so much as a little girl trying to be the good girl so much. And if I didn't get 100% on a test, or a teacher went, oh, Adele, it was like, internally,
devastating.
This criticism, which I just was like, oh, she's a sensitive child. I don't consider myself that, but that pain, it was like a bomb of 1,000 pins going off inside of me. It was like a physical pain. So that kind of understanding now allows me to parent my children better, because I can see it in them and manage that in them. So it's like a constant unfolding of getting that diagnosis. It's just the beginning of that reflective process.
Well, I'm glad you brought up these different components too, because I think a lot of people aren't aware of them, and so it's just like understanding. That's what's so beautiful about getting into this kind of thing and a diagnosis. I know a lot of people, there's a lot of debate whether a diagnosis is, or diagnosi, I don't know, whatever the plural would be, are putting people in a box, but it's so freeing for so many of us, right? Particularly, getting into those little things. Like, I can remember so much being devastated at any little thing that it seemed like I did wrong, right? Which is it's a tough way to grow up, right? It's a tough way.
It's a painful.
Right, because we need to fail in order to learn, and it's okay to fail. But if you are so afraid of that failure and other people seeing it, like how that can sort of stunt your growth.
And this like, oh, people just want a label. I'm like, if you had diabetes, you'd want to know. You'd want to know that you had it, so you managed it properly, and it's changed everything. I mean, for me, when I got that diagnosis, because of the work that I do with hormones, I'm like, okay, what are my hormones doing around my ADHD? I was like, oh, I don't know, because there's practically zero research on it. And I was like, okay, like, if this does not highlight the gender bias that exists in some medicine practices, I don't know what does. I'm like, how are my hormones affecting my traits? I don't know.
They're like, oh, we can't study that because your hormones make it too complicated to study.
Let's not worry about that. Don't worry about 50% of the world's population. They'll be fine. We'll just try an approach that works for boys and just cross our fingers and hope for the best.
We'll just give you the same medication. We'll do all the same.
Sure, you'll be fine.
So can I ask you, before we get into the hormones, what was, I guess, the first steps that you took once you got the diagnosis? In what ways did that empower you?
Well, first of all, I became an ADHD walking, talking awareness campaign. I was like, oh my God, everyone needs to know about this. And I was constantly going, that's my ADHD. That's my ADHD. That's my ADHD. So I had conversations with the most important people in my life. Like, you need to sit down and understand this about me. And I was so lucky to have such beautiful people around me that that's like really deepened our understanding and connection. And you also start to have like the equivalent of gaydar. My daughter's like, Mummy, you think everyone's got ADHD? I'm like, once you know, you know.
Like,
I'm like,
I know.
ADHD. So and it's just created this massive community around me, which I just was never an intention, but through being vulnerable and speaking up about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's brought these amazing women into my life. So I went down to understand it. I personally am not medicated.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of women in my community find medication the absolute like game changer for them.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot don't. So for me,
Mm-hmm.
I'm always like, well, what's the answer then?
Yeah.
What do I need? So it's
Yeah.
been, I think I realized a lot of the things I was already doing in my lifestyle had subconsciously been strategies
Yeah.
that manage my ADHD naturally.
Yeah.
So, you know, yoga, breath work, you know, some of the meditation practices, not all of them, my supplementation, my diet, the way I'm like a nutter about my circadian rhythm, you know, these kind of things, I think had probably managed the severity of my ADHD without me realizing that's why I was doing it. I just thought I liked it.
Right. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because it comes back again and again with whatever, you know, of course, we talk about a ton of hormonal issues here on the podcast. Whatever hormonal issues you have to get the foundations in place, right? And everything you just named are the
Absolutely.
foundations, your
Yeah.
circadian rhythm, what you're eating, you know, how you're moving your body. Are you getting restful time in your day? All of those things. So, you know, it may not, that's going to take care of hopefully 90% of it, right? There's still
Yeah.
10% that we
Yeah.
need to do other things for, but it's amazing, you know, that we're always searching for like the big like answer. And it just comes back to honestly living the way that we did for all of
Yeah.
all of human time, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, how often do I find myself going, I wish we still lived in caves? It was
I
so
know,
much
right?
simpler then. Like then everything
Seriously.
peeing, doing.
Kicking
I'm
it.
just like, yeah, let's keep it simple. And we need to strip it back. And I'm sure you see this in your work, is we can get really caught up in the complexities of this test and this new
Yeah.
supplementation program, all these things. It's like, are you sleeping?
Right.
Are you eating
Yes.
properly? What relaxation are you doing? Where are you just doing nothing? You know, and that can be really hard for us. I find that in the ADHD world, we're either like this inner motor that is just like unstoppable, and we're like this machine that keeps going, or we're like always paralyzed under a blanket going, I know there's loads of stuff I really need to be doing and it's taunting me, but I just physically can't move to do it.
Yeah.
You know, we kind of have all of that, and that can be different each day.
100%. So on that note, let's talk about how ADHD impacts our nervous system.
Oh, wow. I mean, where to start? I mean, I would say I think most women's nervous systems are frazzled anyway. But what I see through my clinic is, and again, you know, I'm talking hypothetically, full disclosure, the research is not here to support any of this. So I literally bring in my training and experience around hormones with my understanding and training with ADHD and try and bridge them together until we have and then like science will catch us up at some point, but this is what we do. And if we to kind of look at this within the context of the hormone hierarchy where cortisol is queen bee, we're talking about hormones, we often go straight in at progesterone and estrogen. It's like, forget that, because if our cortisol is dysregulated, there is no point trying to sort your progesterone out.
100%.
And so what I see in neurodivergent women, when we talk back to that little girl who was terrified of getting 9 out of 10 instead of 10 out of 10 in a test, we think about our HPA axis and that stress response, that's dysregulated from time before we can even remember. And I personally believe we go into this dysregulated state that is our norm, that we're constantly scanning our environment for potential threats or triggers that are going to make us have that feeling inside of getting something wrong, which is where I think the perfectionism comes in, because we're constantly striving to not be caught out. We're not doing that consciously, but that's it. It's like, got to get everything right all of the time. And that is exhausting. So our nervous system is literally frazzled. And as we know, this can go for years. Our adrenals are amazing, right? They're like, I've got you, until I've not got you.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, I'm really tired now. I cannot hold you anymore.
Yeah.
So I believe that our nervous systems are hyperstimulated from a very young age. And obviously this then impacts all our other hormones. So talking about non-negotiable ways to support your nervous system, it really is a non-negotiable in your ADHD plan. You know, you can't afford to let that go, and self-care is too weak of a word to describe that, but creating this time where you nourish your nervous system in whatever way works for you. And I don't think sitting quietly, silently in a room using this very masculine model of silencing the mind in meditation is that effective for us. Sometimes it is work until 10 o'clock at night to finish the stuff so you can start thinking about it and then relax,
Mhm.
because we can't unhook out of it, right?
Mhm.
Quite
Yeah.
often my husband will say, baby, you're going to put the laptop down. And I sit down to him like rigid, frozen. He's like, you're still thinking about the thing, aren't you? I'm like, I just need to do the thing and then I can relax.
Right.
And that
Right.
might be our approach. That might not
Yeah.
be right for a neurotypical person. But
Right.
we have to honor that nervous system. We have to get outside and move our body in the fresh air. We have to ground our feet on the earth
Yeah.
and just be in our body. When was the last time you checked in with how your body actually feels? Are your shoulders up by your ear? Where are you holding tension? It's like, oh my
Mhm.
gosh,
Mhm.
just breathe deeply into your body just for a second.
Yeah.
So it's just finding these little ways to honor that and build those adrenals back up, whether it's supplementation, these, stress mitigation practices that work for you. We
Mhm.
have to support our nervous system, because I'm yet to find an ADHD woman who hasn't got a frazzled one.
Yeah, and I think that is so important for, I work with a decent amount of women that,
Mm.
I mean, we're always going to target the cortisol. We're always going to target the
Yeah.
nervous system, and a lot of times, it's like they do all of the things and they're like, I don't understand why this isn't shifting, and
Mm.
so it's like this is another piece of the puzzle, the
Yeah.
ADHD aspect, right? I think that there's even a decent amount of women who may not have had it as much, or, just didn't have it at all, maybe, or just at a very low level before that. We live in this time now where it's just triggered it to come
Mm.
out in such a much bigger way, but I think about me testing cortisol probably the first time in my late 20s and not understanding why I already had this like sort of high cortisol going on across
Mm.
the board, It's like,
Mm.
well, why can't my body handle these things, And I'm trying to do these different things, it's not helping. And now it just sort of makes sense of
Mm.
having ADHD and having your system sort of already up here, and
Mm.
I'd already put together by that point that, my mom was under high anxiety while
Yeah.
she was carrying me,
Yeah.
and we do know from research that that impacts the growing baby, right? Sets your system kind of
100%.
on a higher level
Yeah.
already, and so I can imagine that there's, again, probably not a lot of research on this, but a connection
None.
between that and ADHD, right? So it's like
Yeah.
I just love that you're talking about this, because I think it's just another piece of the puzzle when women are like, I don't understand why I can't like level out my cortisol. And it's like, oh, have you thought about this part of it?
Yeah. And that is such an important point, and a conversation I've had recently, that I feel that we are this generation of women who are the most educated in history. We have the most access to the best access to any career that we really want to do. And we've been told this bullshit lie that we can be mothers and good wives and all the other
Yep.
stereotypical nonsense
Yep.
at the same time. It's a
Hustle.
lie. Yeah, we can do all
Yeah.
these things, and you
Yeah.
think your cortisol is going to be all right with that. You add in neurodiversity with that, and then you're building a baby
Yeah.
in your dysregulated nervous system. And I did this twice without
Mm.
completely, because it was just how we live, right?
Right.
And I look
Right.
back and say, just as you've said, us as women are building babies in our
Mhm.
own dysregulated nervous system, and we think their nervous system's going to be all right, you know?
No.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So, I guess if we're talking about getting into dealing with the nervous system and we're talking about cortisol, we do know often as we head into perimenopause, I talk about this a lot, right? I talk about stress and how much
Yeah.
it really impacts us even more deeply. Kind of like when we were maybe able to handle it a bit
Mm.
better, we had the high cortisol, but we're still like cruising for a while, right? And then
Mm.
suddenly you start hitting perimenopause and it's like, oh no, your brain is start to down regulate that cortisol, right? And that's when
Mm.
you have that struggle to get out of bed in the morning situation start to happen.
Mm.
What can you talk about what's going on there and sort of how, women can approach that?
Do you mean within an ADHD context
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
generally?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the thing that's really hard for ADHD women, that it's hard enough to make change as it is. Now, if you add in for us, if you don't really understand what's happening, we need to know the why. of absolutely everything. I mean, I'm watching my ADHD chat group tonight and they're like, what are people in America called radiators? And I'm like, I love that we need to even ask this question. We need to know why. So if we don't understand why this is happening, we can't do anything about it. We find it really hard to hook into the motivation to make change. So the first thing is understand, maybe get a cortisol pattern test done, see what's happening so you can see the data of your unique pattern. The second thing, I think, finding someone to support you properly with how to do this. Don't try and grab things, chuck them at the wall and just hope that something sticks, right? One of the things with ADHD women that I see is we never give up on finding a solution. No matter how crap we feel, we're always like, there's got to be an answer. We don't accept that no is the answer. There's got to be an answer to this. And I love that in us. And then it's that finding that way to balance it out. So we need to look at the impact. What we need to do is break down what is an ADHD trait and what is a symptom of hormone imbalance, whether that be cortisol, insulin, progesterone, estrogen, whatever that is, because estrogen plays such a massive role for us. We need to understand that. And until we do that, it's really difficult to manage either one properly. We need to learn how to manage things like that cortisol that cortisol imbalance, not being able to get up in the morning and having this second wind at night. We need to understand it's not just, oh, well, I'm just a night person, I'm just a night owl. No, there's probably something going on with your cortisol that needs addressing so that you can sleep and putting those things in place. It's really working to understand your body. And we're not taught that as women. We're not taught. And I'm sure you get this, a number of women that say to me, why has no one told me this? I've spent decades trying to do all the stuff and I just needed to know this. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, this thing that happens for so many women, their 20s and their 30s, they are able to kind of manage, even if they don't feel quite as good as they want to, they're still sort of riding high. And then suddenly 35 or maybe 40 for some women are still fine in their late 30s, but suddenly 40 hits and they're like, holy crap, like what happened here,
And I think in that season, that is where we're seeing these ADHD traits come up because of what's happening with the estrogen and progesterone. So when we're looking at the dopamine being an issue, I mean, they still don't really know what causes ADHD, but there's some kind of theories out there around something to do with dopamine. It's really what we've got. And what we know is that estrogen sensitizes dopamine. So when we've got that in our 20s and 30s, all our strategies, whether we're conscious of them or not, we're all right. We're kind of getting through it and it's okay until we go into our premenstrual phase. So we know that women with ADHD are at much greater risk of having PMDD than the general population. So we have this much harder time, and this is usually due to progesterone because estrogen gets us like, oh, okay, I'm functioning, we're good. Progesterone kicks in. For neurotypical women, that's like nice and calming, relaxing, we're all good. For divergent women, it's like raining on our parade because we've got the estrogen keeping us really happy with the dopamine, and then progesterone is like, hi, I'm here to dampen all of that. So we have this really tough time for some of us. So then we go into perimenopause. Progesterone kind of drops off a cliff. So any benefits we could have been having from that are gone. Estrogen's just floating around, but probably on this general decline. And we're just like, what fresh hell is this? What is this? Like all this stuff I thought I was on top of. And I believe this is what takes so long for women to get diagnosed. Because when we're naturally fluctuating and cycling, we kind of go, oh, I'm all right most of the time. And then we have this awful week potentially where all our traits are like out the box. We're exhausted, overwhelmed, can't keep on top of anything, just doing the stuff we need to do feels really hard. Then we come out of it when estrogen rises and we're like, oh, I was just having a bad week. And we stay in that cycle for years until perimenopause comes, when we haven't got so much of that fluctuation and it just all becomes really quite messy. And then we go, okay, I can't do this anymore. There's something else going on.
And I mean, it's so true. I mean, as the progesterone starts to go down, and I always tell women, think post 35. It's not 48, like a lot of doctors are going to tell you, but also this estrogen, like, especially, late 30s, early 40s, it's like up, down, all over the place. And so absolutely, you're dealing with throughout the month all these sort of dips and, valleys and ups and downs that you may not have encountered before. And so that's why going back again to, we talked about cortisol already, but let's also
Mm.
talk about insulin, because
Oh,
that's
yeah.
another one that's so impactful that I think a lot of people don't think about when we're talking sex
Mm.
hormones.
Oh my gosh. And if we're not dealing with these queen bees of cortisol and insulin, don't bother with the rest.
Yes.
We have to do this. And interestingly, there are studies that are showing that ADHD people are much higher risk of type 2 diabetes than the general population. There's
Interesting.
like there's one study that has shown that we have a link with PCOS. So there's this link with PCOS and ADHD. I've recently been doing some work looking at endo and ADHD and a really high population there. So we're seeing this, but of course, we've not got the information to back it up.
Right.
Now, when we come back to that PCOS and diabetes, I believe one of the reasons that there's this link is we're not very good at eating. Right. I'll expand on that. We have many more challenges around how we eat than the general population. Okay. And the reasons being, we get completely distracted and forget to eat until we could eat a small child, and then oh my God, I need to eat now.
Yeah.
We don't notice our body signals as much as other people do. So we might not notice that we need a wee until our bladder's about to explode, or we might not realize we've not drunk water all day until we go, oh my God, I haven't had a drink. It's been 8 hours. So we get completely distracted, especially if we're hyper focused on something.
Right.
I mean, if I'm interested, so we're talking about the attention deficit. If you ask me to do something I'm not interested in, you can explain it to me 30 times. I am not going to take that in. If I'm interested, I can sit for days in that space. I mean, one of my kids would have to have a broken leg and I'll still be like, oh, could you go and ask daddy? I don't want to come out of it. I'm so in it.
Yeah.
So we get into that level of intensity where we don't want to stop because we have to eat. It's like an irritation. So if we have to eat, it might be stuff that's going to mess with our blood sugar.
Right.
We can find eating really boring. So it's like some people I'll just eat to survive. So it's going to be like cheese and crackers. It's that kind of basic.
Yeah.
We can also find it really difficult to follow recipes if there's just not because we're not intelligent enough to, but because it's boring and we don't want to do it. Yeah. Or there's something that involves too many steps. So I had a client today who were trying to look at caffeine. She's like, I'd really love to swap my morning coffee for cacao. She's like, but I've got the block of cacao there. She's like, but I look at it, I'm like, oh, but I've got to get a chopping board and a knife. I just can't be bothered. So it's that, to anyone else, that might look really, well, just cut it. It's easy. And to us, it's like, no, I'd rather go without because it's just too much. So these kind of factors, I think, play a role. I don't think they're the only reason, but they play a role in it being much more challenging for us to find this consistency of balancing our blood sugars. Because it's like, let's make scrambled eggs and smoked salmon and avocado, rock it with olive oil for breakfast. I'm like, I would love to devour that if someone else is going to make it for me.
Yeah.
But the steps involved in getting to that point is like, no, I'm just going to eat a bit of bread with butter on it. That's it. Or grab the croissant and a coffee.
I would say that is probably, you just explained 90% of my clients, right? Whether they have ADHD or not. But I think as we've been talking about, I think it's much more common than people realize. But, it's funny because sometimes too, as a coach, I will say, they're like, oh, I don't have enough time to do that during the week. So I'm like, okay, on Sundays, make a bunch of eggs that are, that are hard boiled and put it in the fridge. And people are like, okay.
But it works.
But it works. Exactly.
Just hard boil about 1,000 eggs, stick them in the fridge, get a packet of salmon, handful of rocket, go duff, duff, duff. Done.
Exactly.
Don't make it any more complicated. If you want to spend hours in the kitchen making kale crisps and spirulina smoothies, amazing. But if you don't, that is fine. We want to balance that. Eat a handful of cashews if that's all you can do, but get that protein and fat in you, so your cortisol and insulin are not dysregulated from the get-go, because they will amplify your ADHD traits. They will set you off on such a bad foot. If you are starving yourself till 11:30, 12 in the day because you've forgotten to eat the nuts, whatever's quick and easy, just so that doesn't happen. It's going to be a step towards moving to a more regulated place.
Right. I've had some clients too that will say, oh yeah, I just kind of naturally intermittent fast because they forget to eat until noon. I'm like, Well, there's a
Let's have a chat
lot of
about that.
issues with the statement, but
Yeah.
yeah, I was like,
Yeah.
let's talk about getting some protein in that first
Mm.
hour in the day, and
Yeah.
I mean, I love everything that you're saying because I think whether you have ADHD or not, so many women do feel overwhelmed in their
Yeah.
lives. And when you give them too many like preparatory things to do or just
No.
make it too hard, they're gonna be like, no, I'm gonna pick up the thing from Starbucks or I'm gonna
Yeah.
whatever, and so it's like we have to make these things easier instead of this
And
ideal
this is,
of perfection.
yeah.
Yeah.
And this is where we start to harness the power of our cycle. Know which
Mhm.
phase of your cycle you can be asked to do the prep, right? Where it's like,
Mhm.
make use of that estrogen. It's like an hour on a Sunday. You're going to hate that hour of your life, but
Mhm.
you're going to be so grateful to yourself for the rest of the month. Make
Yep.
up smoothie packs and shove them in the freezer. Do a
Yes.
massive lunch I could eat the same thing every single day as long as I don't have to make it from scratch,
Right.
make a
Right.
massive lunch all
Yeah.
in the freezer during that phase. And
Yep.
every single day of that month, I'm like, I'm so grateful to myself for
Yeah.
making this, because otherwise
Yeah.
it's cheese and crackers, because I'm
Right.
busy and I'm going to grab that because it's easy and I cannot be bothered to make anything. And
Right.
this is how we start using the power of our cycle
Yeah.
to make us feel better generally, but manage
Yeah.
our traits from an ADHD perspective. So I teach my clients how to track their ADHD traits against their cycle and then
Mm.
use that data to plan their diary. So they
Yep.
know, like, don't go out with your friends
Yep.
during that week.
Yep.
Like, just
Yep.
don't do it. Use that week to batch cook. Use that week to put all your
Mm.
supplements in the little pots for the month ahead, all that stuff
Mhm.
we hate
Mhm.
doing.
Yeah.
Just use that time then. And
Yeah.
that's how you start to make an ADHD friendly lifestyle from a hormone perspective.
I love that because, I certainly talk a lot about tracking your cycle. And
Mm,
that's such a revelation, right, to so many women
yeah,
because, of course, we've never been taught about that.
yeah,
And, it can be, some people can feel unmotivated, I think, around doing that at first. But
mm,
I explain often, like, all of the different things in your life that can be better if you start tracking your cycle. And this is just another one if you have ADHD. I mean, it makes so much sense to me.
do you know what? I think it's the biggest act of rebellion as a
Yeah.
woman
Yeah.
to know your unique rhythm and cycle
Yeah.
and manage your life around it as much as humanly possible. Bear in mind, we've got this little thing of patriarchy that we've kind of got to put
Getting in
up
the
with.
way.
But yeah,
Yeah.
but actually trying to manage that is such an act of rebellion and
Yeah.
reclamation
Yep.
of our power, of coming
Yep.
back and going, this same
Absolutely.
thing every single day approach does not work for me. Stop telling me to hit the gym 5 days a week. Stop telling me that I should be intermittent fasting aggressively. Stop telling me I should be on a
Mhm.
keto diet, because that works really well for men. It doesn't support my body.
Yep.
And I need to take that back
Yep.
and look at the advice that is evidence based and supportive for women, that is intuitive to my body, that feels good to me. Because if ADHD is anything, we are so emotionally intelligent and intuitive
Mhm.
to what we and others need. And that is one of
Yes.
our superpowers. So we need to take that real control of that. I feel really passionately about us kind of reclaiming
Yes.
that.
I love it. I think that's
Mm,
just all of it in a nutshell, right? I mean, that's what
mm,
I try and do in my work too, because we have, been so disempowered in general
mm.
around our bodies. And then, of course, everything that's going on in the United States right now and around the world just continues to disempower us. And so it's like
Yeah.
we really have to step into this. And, you know, not just for our health and the health of our children, but if you actually want to enjoy life, right? This is the
Mm,
thing, too, is that there's so such a struggle with enjoyment. Obviously, if you don't have energy, if you're,
yeah.
just like this up and down all the time, right? You're just constantly overtaken by moods, different, mood swings and things like that. It's like you can't really enjoy your life in the way that we should, have the right to, in my opinion, and so that
Yeah.
rebellion is getting you to actually, enjoy your life. Hey,
Yeah.
who knew?
And that is one of the most consistent things I see on my consultation forms from women. When I say, what do you want?
Hmm.
I just want to feel more balanced. I
Yeah.
want to feel more energized. I want to enjoy my life again.
Yeah.
They are like, why are so many women? That is like a basic human need.
Yep.
Why are so many of us showing up like we do,
Yep.
juggling all the plates, keeping it all going,
Yeah.
and feeling like crap? I just want to have some energy. I just
Yeah.
want to be able to sleep. I just don't want to feel like I want to kill the people I love on
Yeah.
a monthly basis. It's
Yeah.
not a lot to ask, you know.
No.
We just need the tools and the education with what was it was taken from us eons ago. This would have been passed down from grandmother to mother to daughter, this information about how to honor our bodies, and it's
Yeah.
been removed. And I'm so grateful to be living at a time where there's this resurgence and this
Yep.
remembering. And I believe
Yes.
that this work, I feel so passionate about it because I believe I'm part of something that I won't live to see the outcome of, but I feel privileged to have a really big mouth on a soapbox waving the flag for this change to come about.
Oh, I love it. So good.
Mm,
Yeah, so
mm.
motivating. So, can we talk a little bit about your thoughts on as women do move deeper into perimenopause and maybe they, decide to look into bioidentical hormone replacement
Yeah.
therapy and how that fits in with the ADHD picture?
I love this. Okay, so this is the challenge that women, ADHD women have. Okay,
Yeah.
we have, as we love in the medicine world, we have the ADHD doctory side on one side, and then we have the HRT and the hormone side on this side, and never the two shall meet. Okay, so usually if you speak to your ADHD professional about your hormones, if you're lucky, they might know that it has some kind of influence, but it's likely going to be told, oh no, I don't deal with that. And the same in the hormone world. They're not going to have a clue how your ADHD is affected for your HRT, which is why podcasts like you are doing here are so incredible, because it allows you to be empowered with the information to advocate for yourself. Now, what I try and do is provide the bridge between these two services to bring it together, because HRT is a fundamental part of ADHD management in perimenopause. And as you said there, I'm not a fan of all HRT. The right type of HRT taken the right way with the right support can be a game changer. And that is because when we're looking at the brain and the parts of the brain that have hormone receptors on, that tells us that those parts of the brain rely on those hormones in order to function optimally. And that's where we're looking at things like our executive dysfunction. The issues that we see in ADHD have all these hormone receptors. So when these hormones drop off a cliff in perimenopause, it would make sense that we're going to have a really tough time. So why would you not replace them? If you're a diabetic, you would get insulin. If you had a thyroid issue, you would probably get thyroxine. We need to remove this stigma that by taking this type of HRT is some kind of failure to managing perimenopause, particularly as a neurodivergent woman. It needs to be part of your treatment plan, if that's what you choose. Some women choose that, and that's fine. But understand that it can be a fundamental part of managing your traits during that season. It's hard enough. Like, people, we don't need to make this any harder for ourselves. It's there for us. It can be supportive. It's not for every woman, as we know, but having a space to explore that and titrate it in and see how it affects you, I'm a big fan.
Yes, absolutely. And I always say this on the podcast, in my blogs, if you don't have a doctor who is open to HRT, it's time to find another one.
Get a new one.
It's time to find
Shout
one.
loudly.
That understands it and is going to work with you through this process and understand there's multiple avenues of HRT and BHRT, and if one doesn't work, another one might. And there's so many beyond ADHD, it's like our bone health, our heart health, our brain health for the long term.
Oh my gosh.
It's without those hormones, this is the major issues that women have in old age is osteoporosis, dementia, heart disease. So, there's so many reasons for it.
Old people's homes are full of women who wouldn't be there if they had HRT. There is so much misinformation about it. And I could literally get on my soapbox and talk to you all day about HRT because I'm so passionate about it, about women understanding it to make a properly informed decision. Absolutely. Because it does, as you said, protects us so much. And I think this is something that people like you and women in the women's health world have done such an uncelebrated, incredible job of doing, is raising awareness around this, because the medical world haven't done it.
Right.
They have not, even today I had one of my clients come back to me and say, she's gone with a Dutch test that shows no progesterone in her mid-40s. And the doctor's like, well, why do you need it? Because I haven't got any. I haven't got any progesterone. I'm like, what else do you want me to do? I've got this list of symptoms. I've got this lab report that says no progesterone. At what
And
point
they're
can you
like,
prescribe me?
yeah.
And
No,
this,
they're like, go on antidepressants instead.
yeah,
Yep.
just wait until have you got a dry vagina and are you having hot flushes? No, well, then you don't need HRT. I'm like,
Yeah.
come on. You know, the lead professors on menopause in the world are saying we need to treat women with HRT much earlier in their early
Yes.
40s when they are presenting with symptoms like anxiety and low mood and sleep disruption.
Yeah.
These are the first signs of perimenopause and they're huge in ADHD women. So why
Mhm.
would you not consider, even if
Mhm.
it's progesterone only for that
Yes.
first phase,
Yep.
you know, you
100%.
haven't
Yep.
got it. So
Yep.
yeah, as you can tell, I get very passionate about that.
Oh, girl, I'm like, we could go on. There could be a whole episode just on this
Yeah.
easily, for sure. You did bring up thyroxine, and that's
Mm,
one other aspect of, talking about the thyroid and ADHD, because
mm.
I definitely have some personal experience with that. So I'd love to hear what you have to say about it.
So comes back to understanding the factors that affect how the thyroid functions, right? And it comes back to our lovely adrenals in so
Mhm.
many women. So again, the research is non-existent. So what do we know? We have to come back and know, okay, I see a disproportionate of number of ADHD women with some level of thyroid imbalance. Okay, they might not be meeting medical thresholds,
Right.
but there's stuff going on there.
Yeah.
And I believe that this is due to our cortisol and our stress response.
Yeah.
Because we are in this dysregulated state basically for the minute we're born. And we know that this stops our thyroid working
Mhm.
properly when we are in this stress state. So, of course, we are going to see a disproportionate amount of thyroid issues in ADHD women who, by my personal clinical experience, I'm not saying, again, this is research
Yep.
based, have a much more stressed system. And so this is what I see in my
Mhm.
clinical practice.
Hmm. Do you find that a lot of these women need to go on thyroid medication or thyroid glandulars, or if they take care of sort of the cortisol piece, that often levels out the thyroid?
Yeah, that's what I see.
Hmm.
So generally, by when they've kind of come to me, I'm like, we need to really look at this. I'm always pushing for the full panel thyroid.
Yeah.
Let's go in and do this. And obviously, again, having to have that battle with a doctor as to why that's necessary, but getting it and then looking at it in terms of functional
Yep.
ranges and
Yep.
not medical ranges, and
Yep.
being able to say, look, let's look at doing X, Y, and Z to support your thyroid so that we don't see a deterioration where you do meet disease thresholds.
Yep.
And that quite often is enough.
Yeah, yeah. And I just want to point out to people in the US, because it is such a struggle sometimes to get a doctor that is even going
Mm.
to ponder going past TSH, which tells
Yeah.
us very little,
Yeah. Really
Um,
helpful test that, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah. And, and things like thyroid antibodies aren't even on,
Yeah.
the picture at all until way too late in the game for a
Yeah.
lot of women. But there is a newer company called Paloma Health, and I think it's available in 38 states, and their whole focus is thyroid. And so this is something,
Amazing.
yeah, that is telehealth, and they have an option of utilizing functional doctors as part of this. So I've worked
Brilliant.
with them, and they go into all of the things, that we need for our thyroid to function properly. Like we,
Mm.
need to understand how our magnesium levels and our zinc levels and
Yeah.
all these things
Brilliant.
are, And so if you don't have a doctor and you're in the US, that is going to really
Mm.
test your thyroid, I would highly recommend Paloma,
Mm.
because it's, I do like that some of these companies, if you want to call them that, are sort of popping out based on our healthcare system that isn't so wonderful on the whole.
Oh, honey, you should be seeing where we're at in Britain.
I'm
You
sure.
know,
I'm sure.
we
I
know.
know.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah. Everyone's just like, please, God, don't let me get ill.
yeah, exactly, pretty much. So I mean, I love that we've covered some of the major areas, really,
Mm.
adrenal health, thyroid health, and
Yeah.
then, certainly, obviously, our insulin is so important, and then diving into estrogen and progesterone. Are there any sort of connections you see at all with like testosterone levels or DHEA levels
Mm.
and ADHD?
Yeah. So DHEA, not so much because it's one that we're not really on here in the UK in terms of testing. People kind of
Gotcha.
go, what? Sorry, what are you talking about? So there's not very much discussion around that.
Mhm.
But I have no doubt that I would see like imbalances in that, particularly when they're coming back in the Dutch tests.
Yeah.
Testosterone, interestingly, I tend to see we have higher amounts, which
Interesting.
again, I think is linked through to our insulin dysregulation. So it's not doesn't tend to be kind of at PCOS like that, not that kind of picture, but we tend to be, and I actually think I would describe myself as quite a testosterone woman,
Yeah.
you know, not in terms of like my build, I think like, but my personality
Right.
and character. And I
Yeah.
see that quite a lot.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So yes, again, no research, but that's what I see
Yeah.
through experience.
And that makes sense. I mean, and going back to the PCOS you were talking about earlier, you know, that connection there, which
Mm.
obviously testosterone is often
Yeah.
high in too, you know, and so I love these kinds of discussions because I hope people that are listening start to see all these connections, right? And
Yeah.
that again, no matter which hormonal irregularity is going on, there's these base foundations to take
Yeah.
care of all of them, you know?
Honestly, we have to bring hormones into every medical discussion
Yes.
when you are dealing with a woman. You cannot afford, whether it's ADHD or something else, you cannot pretend she doesn't have a cycle,
Yeah.
which is how we've operated since medicine existed.
Mm-hmm.
They affect everything. Our hormones, as you know, affect every system in our body. Why are we not considering them in every treatment plan? You know, we know, for example, that women are much more likely to have side effects to medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Why are we not having that conversation?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
we have to bring this discussion in on all these levels and not just focus on progesterone, estrogen, and say, let's shut it down with the pill. You
I
know,
know.
let's look at them all. They don't exist in a vacuum, these
Yeah.
imbalances. It's the system. Let's nourish ourselves. Come back to this nourishment. We're in depletion all the time. Give ourselves permission, guilt free, to nourish ourselves.
Ah, so good.
Mm,
Yes. Like
mm,
you're speaking my language for
yeah.
sure. So let everybody know how they can get in contact with you.
I like to hang out on Instagram, so I'm
Okay.
Harmonize You on Instagram. I offer free discovery calls for women because, you know, I don't have all the answers. But I have an amazing community of different practitioners and therapists. So if I spoke to you and I'm not the right person, I will probably know somebody who is. But honestly, if you're a woman struggling with ADHD and you want to manage that, look at your hormones because they play such a big role and they can do so much to create your ADHD friendly lifestyle. So come and chat to me on Instagram. I love
Yeah.
speaking to people on there.
And then do you have a group too that you were talking about earlier?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we have a WhatsApp group called ADHD Divas. I don't know most of the women on there now. It's just like grown and grown and grown. And it's amazing. Like it's just great. It's a place to be completely unmasked. And some like people share really good tips. People talk about medications, people talk about lifestyle practices, and then we share really funny memes or educational things or different workshops. Like it goes in flurries,
Yeah.
but it's such an incredible community and resource of support. So that is something that's open for any woman affected by ADHD. You don't have to be diagnosed. If by the time you say to me, I've got ADHD, I don't need you to be diagnosed because, you know, I think people think we just wake up one morning and go, yeah, I think I'm going to say I've got ADHD. They don't know we've been down that rabbit hole for
Fun.
days. Yeah. Yeah.
Too funny. I love it. Well, thank you for sharing all of your incredible information today. It's been just beautiful and eye-opening, and you know, I love that these are the discussions that we're having now,
Mm.
and every time you know, a woman hears this and goes, aha, I'm so happy about that, you know. So thank you for
Yeah, me
the work that
too.
you're doing and
Oh,
sharing with everyone.
I'm just so grateful to be here,
Yeah.
honestly, to have this conversation. If it just reaches one woman who goes, oh my gosh, that's me,
Yeah.
then it's worthwhile. So I really appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, you guys, thanks for being here, and I will see you next week.